The morning light cut through San Diego Bay like polished steel, casting long shadows across the USS Seraphim's forecastle deck. Maya Ortiz stood in the third row of folding chairs, her fingers wrapped around a printed program that bore her wife's name in careful typeface. The dress whites of assembled sailors created a sea of uniformity that somehow made the empty spaces more pronounced. Chairs left vacant for those who would never attend another ceremony. At 41, Maya possessed the kind of steady presence that came from years of working with her hands. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a black dress that spoke of respect rather than fashion. But it was her left hand that drew the eye, a wedding band unlike any regulation ring, forged from what appeared to be military brass and etched with markings too small to read without close inspection. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harbor generators hummed their constant rhythm beneath the ceremony's careful choreography. Ensign Priya Narang moved between the staging areas with clipboard precision, her young face serious with the weight of coordinating every detail. She checked her watch, made a notation, and signaled to the color guard with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that perfect proceedings were more than protocol. They were promises kept to families who needed ceremony to make sense of loss. Admiral Elias Roon approached the podium with measured steps. At 58, he carried the bearing of 3 decades in submarines and surface warfare, his chest decorated with ribbons that told stories of storms weathered and responsibilities shouldered. His eyes swept the assembly with the automatic assessment of a commander who had learned to read crowds like weather patterns. Behind him, the ship's bell gleamed in its mounting, each letter of the Seraphim's name polished to mirror brightness. The flags snapped in the harbor breeze, and somewhere in the family section, a child whispered a question to her mother about when Daddy was coming home. Ladies and gentlemen, Roon's voice carried easily across the deck, trained by years of shipboard announcements over wind and engine noise. We gathered today to honor service, celebrate advancement, and remember sacrifice. The men and women we promote today have earned their place through dedication and excellence. Those we remember today earned their place through the ultimate gift, their lives in service to our nation. Maya's grip tightened on the program. Lieutenant Commander Elena Park's photograph smiled from the memorial section, captured in dress whites with the slight quirk at the corner of her mouth that Maya knew meant she was trying not to laugh at something. The official text beneath read, "Lost in training mishap, 15 March. Survived by spouse Maya Ortiz." Her dedication to crew safety and tactical excellence exemplified the finest traditions of naval service. The Admiral's hand rose toward the flag. "Please rise for the national anthem." The assembly stood as one. The scrape of chair legs and rustle of fabric created a brief symphony of movement. The Navy band lifted their instruments, the conductor's baton poised. In that suspended moment before the first note, Maya's hand moved unconsciously to her ring, turning it against her finger in a gesture that had become habit. The morning light caught the micro-etching at exactly the right angle. Admiral Roon's hand froze midway to his heart. His eyes, trained by decades of navigation and chart work, recognized coordinates when he saw them. The numbers were tiny, barely visible, but they were there. 32 degrees, 38 minutes, 41 seconds north. 117 degrees, 14 minutes, 22 seconds west. His mind automatically began the conversion, and what he found made his blood run cold. Those coordinates placed a vessel 12 nautical miles southwest of the official incident site, in restricted waters that no training exercise should have approached. The conductor waited. The band held their instruments ready. 300 people stood at attention, hands over hearts, eyes on the flag. The harbor generators continued their endless rhythm, but something had shifted in the careful architecture of ceremony. "Admiral?" Ensign Narang's voice was barely audible, a whispered prompt from someone who lived and breathed proper sequence. Rune's hand completed its journey to his chest, but his eyes never left Maya's ring. In 30 years of command, he had learned to recognize the moments when smooth operations collided with inconvenient truths. He could signal the band, complete the anthem, proceed through promotions and remembrance with the precision the Navy demanded. He could investigate quietly afterwards, through proper channels, with proper deference to chain of command, or he could choose truth over pageantry. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the crowd, a camera phone lifted. Lieutenant Tyler Kim clocked it immediately, his PAO instincts cataloging potential complications. The color guard stood at perfect attention, but their eyes showed questions. The flag snapped in the breeze. "Belay that," Rune said quietly, his voice carrying in the unnatural stillness. "Color guard, hold position. Band, stand easy." The ripple of confusion moved through the assembled crowd like wind through grain. Chaplain Ruth Delgado, positioned near the family section, stepped forward instinctively. At 55, she had officiated enough military funerals to recognize when ceremony was about to fracture, and she moved with the calm authority of someone who had walked families through their worst moments. Rune stepped down from the podium, his movement deliberate but unhurried. He approached Maya's row with care of someone diffusing ordnance. The crowd parted slightly, creating a corridor of anticipation and concern. "Ma'am?" Admiral Rune's voice, pitched for her alone but carried in the acoustics of the open deck. "I'm Admiral Rune. Would you mind if I looked at your ring?" Maya's face showed no surprise, only the steady calm of someone who had been waiting for this moment for months. She extended her left hand without hesitation, and Rune bent slightly to examine the etching. His submarine-trained eyes confirmed what he had seen from the podium, coordinates that didn't match any official record. "Where did you get this ring?" The question was asked gently but with the weight of command behind it. "I made it," Maya replied, her voice clear enough for the nearest rows to hear. "From my wife's command coin. The night before her deployment, she whispered those coordinates to me. She said if anything happened, I should remember where she really was." The implications hit Rune like a depth charge. An unauthorized evolution, false reporting, a cover-up that reached from deck logs to death certificates. He looked at the young ensign still clutching her clipboard, at the band members shifting uncomfortably in formation, at the families who had come seeking closure and found questions instead. Ensign Narang appeared at his elbow, her training warring with the unprecedented situation. "Sir, should I suspend the ceremony?" Rune said, his decision made. "All personnel hold position. Ensign, I need a secure briefing space immediately. Chaplain Delgado, would you assist with crowd management? And someone get me Jag on the phone." The deck erupted in controlled confusion, the organized chaos of military personnel adapting to unexpected orders. Lieutenant Tim stepped forward, already calculating damage control strategies. Camera phones were definitely recording now, and by evening the story would be spreading through social media and veteran networks. But Maya stood unmoved in the center of it all, her hands still extended, the copper reeds on her ring catching the morning light like a lighthouse beacon cutting through fog. The briefing room smelled of industrial coffee and lingered stress, its fluorescent lights humming over a scarred conference table marked with the rings of countless cups and years of elbows. Maya sat with her hands folded, the wedding ring now under a gooseneck lamp that made its micro-etching clearly visible to the assembled group. Admiral Rune occupied the head of the table, flanked by Ensign Narang with her ever-present clipboard, and Lieutenant Tyler Kim, whose fingers drummed nervously against his phone. Chaplain Ruth Delgado had taken the chair beside Maya, her presence radiating the calm authority that came from shepherding families through the valley of military loss. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore a black dress that spoke of respect rather than fashion.
Had learned that comfort sometimes meant standing between grieving families and institutional expedience. "The ceremony is suspended pending clarification," Rune began, his voice carrying the controlled tension of a commander who had just discovered his carefully ordered world contained fault lines. "Ms. Ortiz, I need you to walk us through exactly how you obtained these coordinates." Maya's response came with the methodical precision of someone who had anticipated this conversation for months. From a small leather portfolio, she produced a series of photographs, time-stamped images showing the progression of the ring's creation. Her metalsmith studio appeared in the background. Anvil, forge, precision tools arranged with the care of a craftsperson who understood that details mattered. "Alina gave me her command coin the night before deployment," Maya said, sliding the first photograph across the table. "She was packing her gear, but she seemed agitated. She kept checking her tablet, making notes. Then she pressed the coin into my hand and whispered those coordinates." The photograph showed the brass coin before alteration, the Seraphim's whole number and motto clearly visible on surfaces that would soon be transformed into wedding jewelry. Subsequent images documented the careful process of melting, shaping, and engraving, each step captured with the thoroughness of someone who understood the importance of evidence. She said if anything happened, I should remember where she really was. At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. That her heart was with the ship and crew. But when I got the casualty notification, she paused, gathering herself with visible effort. The coordinates in the official report were different, 12 nautical miles different. Rune's submarine-trained mind had already begun calculating the implications. Those waters were designated restricted for good reason: unstable thermal layers, unpredictable currents, and depth charges from decades of testing. No routine training evolution should have placed the vessel in that location. Ensign Narang, meanwhile, had been studying the ceremony packet with a thoroughness that made her invaluable for protocol management. Her finger traced a line item in the memorial section, and her brow furrowed with the concentration of someone who lived and breathed procedural accuracy. "Admiral," she said quietly, "there's an anomaly in the documentation. The memorial write-up references Attachment C for operational details, but there's no Attachment C in the packet, just a placeholder note saying, 'Reference Classified Appendix.'" Lieutenant Kim looked up from his phone where he had been monitoring social media feeds. "Sir, we've got a problem. Anthem Pause is already trending. Someone live-streamed the suspension, and now there are questions about why a family member's ring stopped a Navy ceremony." Before Rune could respond, Kim's phone buzzed with an incoming text. His face paled as he read it. "A local reporter named Lana Brooks is at the main gate. She's requesting comment on irregularities in the Lieutenant Commander Park Memorial Service." Chaplain Delgado leaned forward, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone who had counseled families through crises both personal and institutional. "Gentlemen, we need to remember that this isn't about damage control. It's about a widow who deserves to know how her wife died." The room fell silent except for the fluorescent hum and the distant sound of harbor traffic. Maya's ring continued to catch the light, its coordinates a tiny beacon of inconvenient truth in a space designed for comfortable certainties. Rune studied the faces around the table, the young ensign with her procedural concerns, the PAO calculating media implications, the chaplain radiating moral clarity, and the widow who had turned a grief keepsake into evidence. His decision would ripple through careers, families, and institutional credibility. "Ensign Narang, I want you to preserve all documentation related to this ceremony, including emails, draft packets, and revision histories. Nothing gets deleted, nothing gets altered. Lieutenant Kim, draft a holding statement that acknowledges we're conducting a review of memorial service procedures. No specifics about the operational questions." He turned to Maya, his expression mixing command authority with something approaching paternal concern. "Ma'am, I need you to understand the seriousness of what you're alleging. If these coordinates are accurate, it suggests significant irregularities in official reporting. Are you prepared for the scrutiny that comes with pursuing this?" Maya's response came without hesitation, her voice steady as machine steel. "Admiral, I've been living with questions for 8 months. Alina was the most safety-conscious officer I ever knew. She wouldn't have been in restricted waters unless someone ordered her there, and she wouldn't have stayed quiet about unsafe operations unless someone silenced her concerns. She reached into her portfolio again, producing a printed email thread. These are messages between Alina and the ship's operations officer from 3 days before the incident. She was raising questions about stress test parameters and requesting clarification on authorization chains. The last message is from the CO's office, telling her the matter was closed pending deployment priorities. Rune scanned the emails, his expression growing more troubled with each exchange. The language was carefully bureaucratic, but the subtext was clear. A junior officer had raised safety concerns and been told to drop them. "I'm calling in JAG," he announced, reaching for the secure phone. "Commander Tessa Vaughn specializes in line-of-duty investigations. If there are irregularities in the official account, she'll find them." As he dialed, Chaplain Delgado reached over and touched Maya's arm gently. "You're doing the right thing," she said quietly. "Elena would be proud." Maya's composure finally cracked slightly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "She always said the truth has a way of surfacing, like oil on water. You can try to disperse it, but eventually it forms a visible slick." Through the briefing room's small window, the Seraphim was visible in the distance, its hull gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere aboard that ship were logbooks, maintenance records, and duty rosters that might confirm or contradict the coordinates etched in Maya's wedding ring. The hunt for truth was about to begin.
Alina paused, a rolled pair of socks in her hands. "The CO's pushing readiness metrics pretty hard. Some of the evolutions he's requesting—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind. It's probably nothing." "Alina," Maya's voice carried the gentle firmness of 8 years of marriage. "What kind of evolutions?" "Stress testing in marginal conditions, equipment tolerance assessments, the kind of stuff that looks great on fitness reports but makes engineers nervous." Alina resumed packing, but her movements carried a tension that Maya recognized as professional concern warring with military loyalty. "And you're one of the engineers who's nervous?" "I filed my concerns through proper channels. Risk assessment matrices, safety protocols, all by the book." Alina's mouth quirked in the expression that Maya knew meant trouble was brewing. Command's response was essentially, "Concerns noted. Evolution continues as planned." Maya moved closer, recognizing the signs of her wife's internal struggle between duty and conscience. "What does your gut tell you?" "That someone's more concerned with looking aggressive than being smart." Alina pulled out her command coin, the brass medallion that marked her as a qualified tactical signals officer aboard the Seraphim. "Maya, if something happens, if the official story doesn't make sense, remember where we really were." She pressed the coin into Maya's palm and whispered coordinates that would later be etched into a wedding ring. The memory dissolved as Maya's phone chimed with a notification. She blinked, finding herself back in the present, surrounded by the familiar tools and surfaces of her studio. The command coin sat in its place of honor on her desk, now transformed into jewelry, but still carrying the weight of final words. Her laptop screen showed a cloud storage folder that she had avoided opening for weeks. Alina's personal files, synchronized from her tablet and accessible through their shared account. Maya's cursor hovered over a folder labeled Deployment Notes, her hand trembling slightly as she considered the implications of what she might find. The folder contained dozens of files, technical specifications, crew rosters, operational schedules, and buried among them a voice memo recorded at 2347 hours on 14 March, less than 24 hours before the incident. Maya clicked play and Alina's voice filled the studio with startling clarity. "Personal log, 14 March. I'm recording this because I need to document my concerns somewhere outside official channels. Captain Holloway held a senior staff meeting today, and he's adamant about proceeding with Evolution Bravo 7 tomorrow night. The parameters he's outlined put us in the southwest training area, specifically grid coordinates 32, 38, 41 north, 117, 14, 22 west. Maya's breath caught. Those were the coordinates whispered in their bedroom, now etched in her ring. I've run the numbers 3 times. Those waters have unstable thermal layers that could interfere with sonar operations, and the sea state forecast shows deteriorating conditions after 2200 hours. I raised these concerns with the XO, who said Command is aware of the conditions and considers them acceptable training variables. Alina's voice carried a note of frustrated professionalism that Maya recognized from years of listening to shop talk over dinner. The thing is, Evolution Bravo 7 isn't in any training schedule I've seen. No coordination with Fleet Training Group, no safety observers, no rescue assets on standby. When I asked about authorization documentation, the CO said it was compartmented for operational security. The recording paused, and Maya could hear the familiar background sounds of the Seraphim: ventilation systems, distant voices, the subtle vibration of a ship at pier. I keep coming back to something Captain Holloway said during the meeting. He mentioned that successful completion of high-stress evolutions would demonstrate command readiness for enhanced operational tempo. That sounds like someone trying to check promotion boxes rather than train effectively. Another pause, longer this time. Maya, if you're listening to this, something went wrong. The coordinates I gave you are where we'll actually be, not where the paperwork says. I've hidden copies of my risk assessment in 3 places: my personal files, Chief Valdez's engineering logs, and with Chaplain Delgado under pastoral confidentiality. The voice memo ended with words that made Maya's chest tighten. I love you. Remember that honor does not require applause. Sometimes it requires the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. Maya sat in the silence that followed, her hand instinctively moving to her wedding ring. The studio's familiar sounds, harbor traffic, distant machinery, the settling of old building bones, seemed muted by the weight of her wife's final professional assessment. She opened a new document on her laptop and began typing, creating the timeline that would either vindicate Alida's concerns or confirm that grief had led her down a path of conspiracy and doubt. But as evidence accumulated, the voice memo, the mismatched coordinates, and the missing attachment C that Ensign Narong had discovered, Maya felt the solid ground of institutional trust shifting beneath her feet. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Ortiz, this is Commander Tessa Vaughn, JAG. Admiral Roon asked me to contact you about meeting tomorrow at 0800 hours to discuss the matters raised during today's ceremony. Please confirm your availability. Maya stared at the message, knowing that her response would set in motion forces beyond her control. She could decline, let the matter drop, allow the Navy's institutional momentum to smooth over inconvenient questions. She could preserve her privacy, avoid the scrutiny that came with challenging official narratives. Or she could honor the coordinates whispered by her wife in their bedroom on the last night they would spend together. She typed her response. I'll be there. I'm bringing everything. Commander Tessa Vaughn approached legal investigations like a surgeon approaching anatomy, with precision, patience, and an intolerance for sloppy thinking that had earned her a reputation as the JAG officer Command least wanted to see walking through their door. At 45, she possessed the kind of sharp-featured intensity that came from years of cross-examining witnesses who thought rank could substitute for truth. Her office in the base legal building reflected her methodical nature, case law arranged by relevance, whiteboards covered in timeline matrices, and a coffee maker that had seen more action than most deployed equipment. This morning, those whiteboards were dedicated to the Seraphim incident, covered with dates, coordinates, and personnel names connected by lines that formed an increasingly complex web of inconsistencies. Maya sat across from Vaughn's desk, her leather portfolio open, and its contents spread across the polished surface like evidence at a crime scene.
Admiral occupied the chair beside her, his presence lending institutional weight to what might otherwise be dismissed as a grieving widow's conspiracy theories. Ensign Narong stood near the whiteboard, sticky flags and legal pads in hand, ready to track every discrepancy with the thoroughness that made her invaluable for complex operations. She moved to the whiteboard, where a horizontal line marked with dates stretched across the top. Below it, entries in red ink noted key events: deployment briefing, risk assessment filing, command response, and finally, the incident itself. The official report places the Seraphim at coordinates 32 degrees, 26 minutes, 18 seconds north, 117 degrees, 9 minutes, 45 seconds west during the incident, Vaughn continued, adding those numbers to the timeline. However, Lieutenant Commander Park's voice memo specifically mentions grid coordinates 32 degrees, 38 minutes, 41 seconds north, 117 degrees, 14 minutes, 22 seconds west, a position 12 nautical miles southwest in restricted waters. Maya's voice was steady as she added context. Alina mentioned 3 places where she hid copies of her risk assessment: her personal files, Chief Valdez's engineering logs, and with Chaplain Delgado under pastoral confidentiality. Rune leaned forward, his submarine commander's mind automatically calculating the implications. Those restricted waters are designated off-limits for good reason. Unstable thermal layers, unpredictable currents, and unexploded ordnance from decades of weapons testing. No routine training evolution should have placed a vessel in that area. Ensign Narang looked up from the ceremony packet she had been studying with forensic attention. "Ma'am, I found something else. The ceremony reference documentation references Attachment C for operational details, but when I traced the document history, that attachment existed in earlier drafts." She approached the whiteboard with a printout covered in highlighted text. The metadata shows Attachment C was present in the ceremony packet until 03:47 hours on the morning of the service. Then it was deleted and replaced with a placeholder reference to Classified Appendix. Vaughn's expression sharpened with the focus of a predator detecting movement. "Who has administrative access to ceremony documentation?" "Protocol Officer, PAO, and the Executive Assistant to the Commanding Officer," Narang replied, consulting her notes. "The deletion timestamp traces to a staff account linked to Captain Holloway's XO." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a warning flare. Vaughn moved to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "I'm drafting subpoena requests for telemetry data, deck logs, maintenance records, and all PAO communications related to the incident. If there's a cover-up in progress, the digital paper trail will expose it." Rune's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He scanned it quickly, his expression growing more troubled. "Captain Holloway is requesting an immediate meeting to discuss personnel matters affecting unit cohesion. He wants to know why JAG is interviewing family members without command notification." "Because command notification defeats the purpose of independent investigation," Vaughn replied dryly. "Admiral, I need protection for any witnesses who come forward. If someone ordered unauthorized operations and then falsified reports, they won't hesitate to silence inconvenient voices." Maya reached into her portfolio again, producing a handwritten note on Seraphim letterhead. "Alina left this in our bedroom safe. It's addressed to whoever asks the right questions." Vaughn read the note aloud. "If you're reading this, it means my concerns about Evolution Bravo 7 were justified. The attached coordinates represent our true position during the operation. PO2 Jonah Reyes was on watch during the incident and may have documentation that contradicts official reports. Master Chief Valdez can verify my engineering assessments. Trust the chaplain. She knows where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively." The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of harbor traffic. Vaughn studied the note with the intensity of someone who had learned to recognize the difference between paranoia and prescience. "PO2 Reyes," she said finally. "I need him found and interviewed before command gets wind of his potential involvement. Ensign Narang, can you locate him without raising flags?" "Yes, ma'am. I can run a routine muster check through the duty office." Rune stood,
his decision crystallizing with the weight of 30 years in uniform. Commander Vaughn, you have my authorization for protected communications with any personnel involved in this investigation. If someone ordered unauthorized operations and then falsified reports, I want the truth exposed regardless of the political consequences. As if summoned by the mention of political consequences, Lieutenant Tyler Kim appeared in the doorway, his expression mixing urgency with barely controlled anxiety. Admiral, we have a problem. The hashtag #AnthemPause is trending nationally. CNN picked up the story, and now there are questions about Navy transparency and accountability. I'm getting calls from Pentagon Public Affairs. Vaughn's smile carried no warmth. Good. External pressure will make it harder for command to bury inconvenient evidence. The spotlight is now our ally, not our enemy. She turned back to the whiteboard, adding new entries to the timeline with methodical precision. Each addition represented another thread in a web that was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence or grief-driven imagination. Ms. Ortiz, she said, you've provided us with multiple leads that suggest significant irregularities in official reporting. Are you prepared for the scrutiny that comes with pursuing this investigation to its conclusion?
Maya's response came without hesitation, her voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who had already counted the cost. Commander, 8 months ago, I lost my wife to what the Navy called a training mishap. Yesterday, I discovered that the Navy's version of events contradicts everything my wife documented about the operation. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for truth. Vaughn nodded approvingly. Then we're going to find it. Ensign Narang, locate PO2 Reyes and arrange a secure interview. I want Master Chief Valdez's engineering logs subpoenaed by end of business today. And someone needs to have a very frank conversation with Chaplain Delgado about what exactly she's been holding under pastoral confidentiality. As the meeting broke up, each participant carrying assignments that would either vindicate Maya's suspicions or expose her to charges of undermining military authority, Vaughn remained behind to study the evidence spread across her desk. The wedding ring caught the morning light streaming through her office windows, its micro-etched coordinates a tiny beacon of inconvenient truth in a world that preferred comfortable certainties. Somewhere aboard the USS Seraphim, logbooks and maintenance records waited to either confirm or deny those coordinates. The hunt for truth was accelerating, and Commander Vaughn had learned long ago that once institutional momentum began moving in the direction of accountability, it became very difficult to stop. The pier stretched into San Diego Bay like a concrete finger pointing toward answers that might never come. PO2 Jonah Reyes walked its length with the measured pace of someone who had learned that hasty movements attracted unwanted attention from chiefs and officers alike. At 24, he possessed the kind of earnest face that made senior enlisted trust him with sensitive tasks, and junior sailors seek his advice about liberty plans and family problems. Behind him, the USS Seraphim rose from the water like a steel monument to maritime engineering, her hull gleaming under work lights as evening maintenance crews prepared for the next day's operations. Jonah had called that ship home for 18 months, long enough to know her moods and rhythms, her crew dynamics and unspoken hierarchies, long enough to know when something was fundamentally wrong. Master Chief Snipe Valdez emerged from the shadows near the Fleet Services building, his presence as solid and dependable as the engineering systems he had maintained for 3 decades. At 58, Valdez carried himself with the quiet authority that came from keeping ships running when everything else went sideways. His weathered hands bore the honest scars of countless repairs, and his eyes held the patience of someone who had outlasted 4 commanding officers and 6 executive officers. "Son, we need to talk," Valdez said, his voice carrying the gravelly warmth that made junior sailors feel both protected and accountable. "About what, Master Chief?" "About why you've been jumping every time someone mentions the park incident. About why you volunteered for extra watches the week after the memorial service. About why Chief Martinez caught you staring at your phone like it contained nuclear launch codes." They walked in silence toward the Fleet and Family Support Center, a low building that served as neutral ground for conversations too sensitive for ship spaces or too personal for official channels. The evening air carried the mixed scents of salt water, diesel fuel, and the institutional food that sustained military communities worldwide. "Master Chief," Jonah began, then stopped, his internal struggle visible in the tension around his eyes. "The night Lieutenant Commander Park was lost, I was standing watch on the bridge. We were supposed to be conducting routine training evolutions in the eastern sector, but the GPS showed us moving southwest into restricted waters." He scrolled through his phone's photo gallery, finding an image that had been weighing on his conscience for 8 months. "I took this picture because I was studying for advancement, and I wanted to practice reading navigation displays. I thought it was just a training exercise." The photograph showed the Seraphim's chart plotter display, timestamp clearly visible, 15 March 2341 hours. The vessel's position marker sat squarely within grid coordinates that matched Maya's ring exactly: 32 degrees, 38 minutes, 41 seconds north, 117 degrees, 14 minutes, 22 seconds west. Valdez examined the image with the critical eye of someone who had spent decades correlating electronic navigation with actual position. "Son, this puts us 12 nautical miles from where the official incident report claims we were." "I know," Jonah replied, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated guilt. "After the incident, I heard the XO telling the communications officer to ensure all electronic logs reflected proper training area coordinates. When I checked the deck log the next day, the entries had been changed." Chaplain Delgado moved closer, her pastoral training recognizing the signs of someone carrying unbearable moral burden. "Jonah, what you witnessed sounds like falsification of official records. That's not just a violation of regulations. It's a betrayal of everything the uniform represents. But if I come forward," Jonah, unconsciously stroking Bosun's head for comfort, "I'm accusing senior officers of covering up the circumstances that killed Lieutenant Commander Park. My word against theirs, my career against their reputations." Master Chief Valdez placed a calloused hand on Jonah's shoulder, the gesture carrying 30 years of institutional memory and hard-earned wisdom. "Son, I've been keeping ships running since before you were born. I've seen good officers make bad decisions, and I've seen bad officers destroy good sailors. But I've never seen anything like what you're describing. Lieutenant Commander Park came to me 3 days before the incident. She had concerns about unauthorized testing in marginal conditions. She filed risk assessments that documented every potential failure mode, every safety protocol that was being waived." "What happened to those assessments?" Delgado asked. "Officially, they were reviewed and filed pending operational requirements. Unofficially, they disappeared from the engineering database the day after the incident." Valdez's expression hardened with the controlled anger of someone who had watched institutional priorities override human lives. "But I keep personal copies of anything that might save sailors' lives. Always have." Jonah's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. His face paled as he read it. "PO2 Reyes, report to XO stateroom immediately for administrative review." "They know," he whispered. "Somehow they know I have something." Valdez's response came with the swift decisiveness that made him invaluable during engineering casualties. "No sailor under my watch gets fed to the sharks for telling the truth. Chaplain, can you invoke confidentiality protections if Jonah formally requests pastoral counseling?" "Absolutely," Delgado replied, "and I can facilitate contact with JAG if he decides to provide evidence for an official investigation." Jonah looked at his phone again, then at the Seraphim's lights reflecting on the harbor water. Somewhere aboard that ship, officers were probably reviewing duty rosters and access logs, trying to identify who might possess inconvenient evidence about unauthorized operations. "If I don't report to the XO," he said slowly, "they'll know for certain I have something to hide." "If you do report," Valdez countered, "they'll have an opportunity to isolate you, discredit your testimony, or worse, transfer you somewhere your voice can't be heard." Bosun seemed to sense the growing tension, pressing closer to Jonah's leg with the instinctive understanding that human anxiety required canine intervention. The therapy dog's presence reminded all 3 humans that some loyalties transcended rank and regulation: the loyalty to truth, to fallen comrades, and to the principles that made military service meaningful. "What would Lieutenant Commander Park want you to do?"
Chaplain Delgado asked gently. Jonah's answer came without hesitation. She'd want me to protect the crew. She always said that officers who lied to their superiors would eventually lie to their subordinates. That trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. He made his decision with the finality of someone stepping across a line from which there was no return. Master Chief, can you guarantee protection if I provide evidence to JAG? Son, no one eats one of mine, not on my watch. The Public Affairs Office occupied prime real estate in the base administration building, its windows offering commanding views of the harbor and the constant reminder that Navy business operated under public scrutiny. Lieutenant Tyler Kim had arranged his workspace with the efficiency of someone who lived in a world of rapid response communications. Multiple monitors displaying social media feeds, news aggregators, and direct messaging systems that connected him to Pentagon Public Affairs and Fleet Headquarters. At 31, Kim possessed the kind of media-savvy intelligence that made him invaluable during crisis communications. But his journalism background occasionally created tension with commanders who preferred narrative control over narrative accuracy. This morning, that tension threatened to reach a breaking point as he stared at trending topics that included #AnthemPause, #NavyTransparency, and #Seraphim Incident. His primary monitor displayed a draft press release that had gone through 6 revisions in 4 hours, each iteration reflecting different pressures from different levels of command. The latest version read, "The U.S. Navy is conducting a routine review of memorial service procedures following questions raised during yesterday's ceremony aboard USS Seraphim. The review is being conducted by qualified personnel in accordance with established protocols." His secondary monitor showed the real-time social media explosion that made his carefully crafted language feel increasingly inadequate. Video clips of Admiral stopping the anthem had been viewed over 2 million times. Defense bloggers were dissecting every frame, and veteran social media groups were sharing theories that ranged from plausible to completely fictional. His phone buzzed with a priority message from the Pentagon. "Expedite narrative closure. Higher visibility requires immediate containment." Kim stared at the message, recognizing the bureaucratic euphemism for burying inconvenient questions under institutional weight. He had been in public affairs long enough to understand the difference between legitimate operational security and politically motivated spin, and this situation was rapidly crossing that line. A knock on his door interrupted his moral inventory. Lana Brooks stood in the doorway, her press credentials clearly visible and her expression carrying the patient determination of someone who had built a career on asking uncomfortable questions. At 38, she possessed the kind of understated presence that made interview subjects forget they were talking to a reporter until they realized they had revealed more than intended. "Lieutenant Kim," she said, stepping into the office with the confidence of someone who knew her rights regarding public access. "I'm hoping you can help clarify some inconsistencies in the official account of the Lieutenant Commander Park incident." Kim's media training warred with his journalistic instincts as he gestured for her to take a seat. "Ms. Brooks, I'm sure you understand that operational details are often classified for security reasons." "I'm not asking about operational details," Lana replied, opening a notebook that suggested she had done considerable homework. "I'm asking about publicly available information that doesn't align with witness accounts from yesterday's ceremony." She consulted her notes with the methodical approach of someone who would learn to build stories from fragments of verifiable information. "The memorial program lists Lieutenant Commander Park as lost during training operations at coordinates 32 degrees, 26 minutes, 18 seconds north and 117 degrees, 9 minutes, 45 seconds west. However, maritime traffic data from that time frame shows no Coast Guard search and rescue operations in that area." Kim felt his carefully constructed talking points crumbling like poorly maintained bulkheads. "Search and rescue operations can be conducted by various agencies, including Navy assets," Lana interrupted smoothly. "But I've filed FOIA requests for all SAR operations in San Diego operational areas during that 48-hour period. The only Navy search activity was centered 12 nautical miles southwest of the reported incident." The implications hung between them like unexploded ordnance. Kim realized he was facing a reporter who understood the difference between official accounts and verifiable facts, and who possessed the patience to document those differences methodically. "Ms. Brooks," he said carefully, "I'm sure you understand that memorial service procedures are designed to honor fallen personnel while protecting operational security. I understand that families deserve accurate information about how their loved ones died," Lana replied, her tone carrying the quiet conviction of someone who had covered enough military stories to recognize institutional deflection. "I also understand that Admiral Roon's decision to halt yesterday's ceremony suggests someone has raised legitimate questions about the official account." Kim's phone buzzed again, this time from Captain Holloway's staff. "PAO will cease all communications with media regarding Seraphim personnel matters. Refer all inquiries to Fleet Public Affairs." The message represented everything Kim had learned to distrust about crisis communications, the instinctive response to silence inconvenient questions rather than address them honestly. He looked at Lana Brooks, recognizing in her persistent professionalism the kind of journalism he had once hoped to practice before military service redirected his career. "Off the record," he said, making a decision that could end his military career, "the questions raised yesterday are being investigated by qualified personnel. The Navy takes seriously any concerns about the accuracy of official reports." Lana's pen moved across her notebook with practiced efficiency. "Can you confirm that JAG is conducting a line-of-duty investigation?" "I can confirm that appropriate investigative protocols are being followed. I can also confirm that the Navy's primary concern is ensuring families receive accurate information about their loved one's service and sacrifice." His computer chimed with an incoming email marked Urgent, Command Review. He scanned it quickly, his expression growing troubled as he read, "Ms. Brooks, I'm going to have to cut this short. I have been directed to refer all media inquiries to higher authority."
Lana closed her notebook and stood, but her expression suggested this conversation was far from over. "Lieutenant, I've been covering military stories for 15 years. I know the difference between legitimate security concerns and institutional damage control. Whatever's happening here, the truth will eventually surface." After she left, Kim sat alone in his office, staring at monitors that displayed the growing social media firestorm surrounding the Seraphim incident. His training told him to draft deflecting statements and coordinate with higher authority to control the narrative. His conscience told him that truth had a way of surfacing regardless of official attempts to contain it. He opened a new document and began typing, crafting a timeline that was sanitized but accurate, enough to prevent the story from being buried under bureaucratic weight, but careful enough to avoid compromising ongoing investigations. The document would find its way to Lana Brooks through channels that could not be traced back to official sources. Outside his window, the USS Seraphim sat at pier, her hull gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere aboard that ship were logbooks, maintenance records, and duty rosters that could either vindicate the official account or expose it as institutional fiction designed to protect careers at the expense of truth. Kim's decision would determine whether those records saw daylight or disappeared into the same bureaucratic void that had swallowed Lieutenant Commander Park's risk assessments. He saved the document and prepared to walk a very thin line between duty and conscience. The base conference room's polished table reflected fluorescent lights like a mirror, its surface scarred by decades of difficult conversations and career-defining moments. Captain Brent Holloway entered with the commanding presence that had carried him through 20 years of steady advancement, his dress uniform immaculate, and his bearing radiating the confidence of someone who had never seriously questioned his own authority. At 46, Holloway possessed the kind of charismatic leadership that inspired immediate loyalty from subordinates and impressed superiors during promotion boards. His record spoke of aggressive readiness metrics, innovative training approaches, and the kind of decisive command style that produced results in measurable terms. What his record didn't document was the human cost of those achievements.
Around the table sat the architects of his unraveling. Commander Vaughn with her legal pads and evidence folders, Admiral Roon, whose expression carried the weight of institutional conscience, Maya Ortiz with her quiet determination, and Master Chief Valdez, whose weathered face showed 3 decades of watching officers make decisions that sailors would live or die with. Ensign Narang operated the digital recorder, her precise movements reflecting the gravity of proceedings that would determine careers, reputations, and the Navy's commitment to accountability. Chaplain Delgado sat near Maya, her presence offering moral support without interfering in the legal process. Captain Holloway, Commander Vaughn began, her voice carrying the controlled intensity of a prosecutor who had built an airtight case. We have several questions regarding operational procedures aboard USS Seraphim during the period leading up to Lieutenant Commander Park's death. Holloway's response came with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to controlling narrative flow. Commander, I'm happy to assist with your inquiry. However, I must note that some of the questions raised appear to be based on incomplete information provided by grieving family members who may not fully understand operational complexities. The dismissive tone caused Maya's jaw to tighten, but she remained silent as Vaughn placed the first piece of evidence on the table. PO2 Reyes's photograph showing the Seraphim's true position during the incident. Captain, this image was captured at 23:41 hours on 15 March, approximately 6 minutes before Lieutenant Commander Park was lost. The timestamp and AIS overlay clearly place your vessel at coordinates 32 degrees 38 minutes 41 seconds north, 117 degrees 14 minutes 22 seconds west. Can you explain why this position doesn't match the coordinates in your official incident report? Holloway studied the photograph with the careful attention of someone recognizing checkmate but refusing to acknowledge it. Navigation displays can be affected by various factors: equipment malfunction, GPS drift, operator error. The coordinates in my official incident report reflect the ship's intended position during routine training evolutions. Intended position? Vaughn's voice sharpened with prosecutorial precision. Captain, are you suggesting your navigation team was incompetent, or are you acknowledging that your vessel was operating outside authorized training areas? Before Holloway could respond, Ensign Narang placed another document on the table, the metadata analysis showing deliberate alteration of ceremony documentation. Sir, we've also discovered that Attachment C, referenced in memorial service materials, was deleted from official files at 03:47 hours on the morning of the ceremony. The deletion originated from a staff account linked to your executive officer. Holloway's composure showed its first crack, a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was calculating damage control strategies. Administrative documents are routinely updated to reflect current security classifications. That's standard protocol. Maya spoke the first time since entering the room, her voice steady as machined steel. Captain, my wife documented her concerns about unauthorized stress testing in restricted waters. She filed risk assessments that you dismissed as pending operational requirements. Are you claiming those assessments were wrong? Mrs. Ortiz, Holloway replied, his tone mixing condescension with barely controlled irritation. With respect, your wife was a junior officer who sometimes allowed perfectionism to interfere with operational tempo. The assessments she filed were reviewed and found to be overly conservative for our mission requirements. Master Chief Valdez's weathered hands clenched involuntarily at the dismissal of Lieutenant Commander Park's professional judgment. Sir, those overly conservative assessments documented equipment parameters that were exceeded during the incident. Engine temperatures, stress tolerances, safety margins, all compromised by operations in conditions she specifically warned against. Vaughn leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Captain, let's discuss Evolution Bravo 7. Can you provide documentation showing proper authorization for operations in restricted waters? The question hit Holloway like a torpedo amidships. His carefully maintained composure finally cracked, revealing the desperate calculation of someone whose career was disintegrating in real time. That operation was conducted under my command authority to maintain crew readiness. Sometimes aggressive training requires accepting calculated risks. Calculated by whom? Admiral Roon spoke the first time, his voice carrying the weight of flag rank and institutional memory. Because the risk assessments filed by your tactical signals officer recommended against operations in those waters, and I see no documentation of higher authority approval for exceeding those recommendations. Holloway turned toward Roon with the desperation of someone playing his final card. Admiral, you know the pressures we face to demonstrate readiness metrics. Fleet Command expects aggressive training that produces measurable results. Sometimes that requires operating at the edge of established parameters. At the edge of parameters, Captain, not beyond them, and certainly not in waters specifically designated as off-limits to training operations. Chaplain Delgado chose that moment to speak. Her voice carried the moral authority that came from counseling families through institutional betrayal. Captain, families trust the Navy to tell them how their loved ones died. When that trust is broken by false reporting, it damages not just individual families, but the entire institution's relationship with those who serve. Holloway's final attempt to damage control revealed the naked ambition that had driven his career. This entire proceeding is based on speculation and the misguided grief of a widow who doesn't understand operational realities. Lieutenant Commander Park's death was a tragic accident during legitimate training operations. Any suggestion of cover-up or falsification is
supported by documentary evidence, witness testimony, and your own admissions. Vaughn interrupted with surgical precision. Captain, you've acknowledged operating outside authorized areas, dismissing safety assessments, and conducting unauthorized stress testing. The only remaining question is whether these actions constitute negligent command decisions or deliberate falsification of official reports. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of harbor traffic. Holloway looked around the table, seeing his career reflected in the faces of people who had chosen truth over institutional convenience. The formal hearing convened in Hangar Bay 3, transformed for the occasion into a makeshift courtroom that spoke of institutional gravity. American flags flanked the proceedings, and a court reporter's stenotype machine captured every word for official record. The assembled audience included family members, crew representatives, and media observers whose presence ensured transparency in proceedings that might otherwise disappear into bureaucratic memory. Commander Vaughn presented her case with the methodical precision of someone who understood that institutional accountability required unassailable evidence. Easels displayed telemetry graphs, maintenance logs, and timeline analyses that painted a devastating picture of command negligence and subsequent cover-up. The evidence clearly demonstrates that USS Seraphim was operating in restricted waters during unauthorized stress testing when Lieutenant Commander Park was lost, Vaughn stated, her voice carrying across the hangar's acoustics. Subsequent attempts to falsify the incident location represent not just violation of regulations, but betrayal of the trust family's place in official reporting. PO2 Jonah Reyes testified under oath, his voice steady despite the career implications of his testimony. I photographed the navigation display because I was studying for advancement and wanted to practice reading tactical plots. I never imagined that photograph would become evidence of false reporting. The telemetry evidence proved even more damaging. Engineering logs showed engine temperatures exceeding safe parameters during the incident window, exactly as Lieutenant Commander Park's risk assessments had predicted. Maintenance records revealed deferred part replacements that should have precluded operations in challenging conditions. Master Chief Valdez's testimony carried the weight of institutional memory. Lieutenant Commander Park's risk assessments were thorough, professional, and prophetic. She documented every failure mode that ultimately contributed to the incident. Her concerns weren't overly conservative. They were ignored because they inconveniently contradicted command intentions. The most dramatic moment came when Vaughn played Lieutenant Commander Park's final voice memo for the official record. Alina's voice filled the hangar space, speaking from beyond death to hold command accountable for decisions that cost her life.
Maya's testimony focused on the human cost of institutional deception. For 8 months, I believe my wife died in a training accident, learning that she actually died because her safety warnings were ignored and that command then falsified reports to hide their negligence. That transforms grief into something far more devastating. Admiral Rune's testimony established the broader implications. This case represents a fundamental breach of military ethics. Officers who lie to families about how their loved ones died will inevitably lie to superiors about operational readiness, creating systemic failures that endanger all personnel. The panel's findings echoed across the hangar bay with the finality of steel meeting steel. Captain Holloway stood at attention as his career dissolved into official condemnation, his face showing the hollow recognition of someone whose ambitions had consumed his integrity. The panel finds that unauthorized stress testing in restricted waters directly contributed to the death of Lieutenant Commander Alina Park, the presiding officer announced. Subsequent falsification of incident reports represents willful deception designed to protect command reputation at the expense of institutional credibility and family trust. The immediate consequences were swift and unambiguous. Holloway was relieved for cause pending court-martial proceedings that would determine criminal liability. His executive officer faced similar charges for document tampering and false reporting. But the broader institutional changes promised more lasting impact. Admiral Rune announced mandatory digital documentation trails for all risk waivers with automatic archiving to JAG offices that would prevent future attempts to evidence suppression. The Alina Park protocols would require independent review of all training operations that exceeded established safety parameters. Chaplain Delgado led a remembrance ceremony that replaced euphemistic language with honest acknowledgement. LT Commander Park died because her professional warnings were ignored by command authority, more concerned with metrics than lives. Her death was preventable, and her family deserved better than institutional deception. Maya stood to address the assembly. Her voice carried across the hangar with quiet strength. Alina always said that honor doesn't require applause. Sometimes it requires the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. Today, we've learned that institutional honor requires the same courage. The proceedings concluded with Admiral Rune's announcement that Maya would consult on developing survivor truth protocols, ensuring that future families would receive honest accounting of their loved ones' deaths. The Navy owes nothing less than complete transparency to those who sacrifice for our mission. As the assembly dispersed, Maya remained behind in the gradually emptying hangar. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light streaming through high windows, its micro-etched coordinates no longer secret evidence, but public testament to the power of truth over institutional convenience. The USS Seraphim was visible through the hangar doors, her hull gleaming in San Diego sunshine. Somewhere aboard that ship, new officers would learn from Lieutenant Commander Park's legacy that courage sometimes meant opposing command authority when lives hung in the balance. Honor, as Alina had always insisted, didn't need applause, but it demanded truth. 6 months after the Hangar Bay verdict, Classroom C-204 in the Naval Education Center had been transformed into something that would have made Lieutenant Commander Park proud. The walls displayed framed technical schematics, annotated in her precise handwriting, safety protocols she drafted during quiet evening watches, thinking of crew members who might one day need the guidance she could never be able to provide in person. Maya stood before a mixed group of officers and senior enlisted personnel. Her presence carried the quiet authority that came from surviving institutional betrayal and choosing construction over destruction. At her side, Master Chief Valdez reviewed lesson materials with the methodical attention he had once reserved for engineering systems, and Ensign Narong, now Lieutenant Narong Jag,
prepared documentation standards that would make future cover-ups significantly more difficult. The Survivor Truth Protocols aren't about blame or retribution, Maya began, addressing the assembled group with the same steady calm that stopped an anthem and changed an institution. They're about ensuring families receive honest answers when the worst happens, and that service members feel empowered to speak truth to authority when lives are at stake. The pilot workshop represented more than training. It was institutional DNA modification, creating antibodies against the kind of moral compromise that cost Valina her life. Participants included commanding officers who had volunteered to test new transparency procedures, family readiness group leaders learning to ask informed questions, and junior officers studying the delicate art of challenging authority constructively. Commander Vaughn entered carrying coffee and updates from the ongoing legal proceedings. Her prosecution of the Holloway case had resulted in convictions that sent clear signals throughout the fleet about the consequences of falsifying reports and ignoring safety protocols. More importantly, her work had established precedents that protected whistleblowers and mandated transparency in casualty investigations.
The new digital documentation requirements are working, Vaughn reported, settling into a chair beside Maya's improvised podium. Fleet-wide implementation of automatic JAG archiving has already prevented 3 attempts at evidence suppression in different commands. Officers know their risk assessments and safety concerns will be preserved regardless of command pressure. Lieutenant Tyler Kim appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand and expression mixing satisfaction with ongoing vigilance. His new transparent communication protocols had become the Navy standard, replacing reflexive damage control with proactive disclosure that built public trust through honesty rather than spin. The media coverage of today's workshop is entirely positive, he reported. Lana Brooks is preparing a feature article about institutional reform rather than scandal management. Her series documenting the changes has shifted the public narrative from outrage to respect for the Navy's commitment to accountability. Through the classroom windows, San Diego Bay stretched toward the horizon, where the USS Seraphim conducted training operations under new safety protocols. The ship had become a symbol of institutional learning rather than institutional shame. Her crew trained in procedures that honored Lieutenant Commander Park's memory through practical application of her safety philosophy. Buzon, the therapy dog, padded into the classroom and settled beside Maya's chair with the intuitive understanding that even positive change required emotional support. His presence reminded everyone that institutional transformation remained deeply personal for those who had lost loved ones to preventable tragedies. Admiral Roon appeared for the session's conclusion, his bearing reflecting the satisfaction of someone who had chosen principle over politics and found the institution stronger for it. His decision to halt the anthem had created temporary chaos but lasting reform, proving that courage in leadership sometimes required public acknowledgement of institutional failure. The pause authority, implemented fleet-wide, has been invoked 17 times in 6 months, Roon announced to the assembled group. Each instance has resulted in productive dialogue about ethical concerns rather than punitive action against those who spoke up. We are creating a culture where moral courage is rewarded rather than punished. Maya consulted notes written in her own careful script, supplemented by observations from Alina's personal journals that had been donated to the training program. Your wife's curriculum draft included a section on constructive dissent, her framework for raising safety concerns while maintaining unit cohesion has become the foundation for junior officer ethics training. The workshop's final exercise involved case study analysis using scenarios based on real incidents where safety concerns had either been properly addressed or dangerously ignored.
Participants worked through decision trees that balanced operational requirements with crew protection, learning to recognize the warning signs that preceded institutional moral failure. The key insight from Lieutenant Commander Park's experience, Maya explained, guiding discussion toward practical application, is that safety concerns ignored at the junior level inevitably become command crisis at the senior level. Early intervention protects everyone, crews, commanders, and the institution itself. As the session concluded, participants signed a class coin that would join others in a display case dedicated to ethical leadership. The coin bore a motto born from the ordeal that had transformed institutional DNA. Honor doesn't need applause. Words that reminded everyone that integrity often required uncomfortable courage rather than comfortable compliance. Maya gathered her materials as the classroom emptied, her movements reflecting the purposeful efficiency of someone who had found sustainable meaning in tragedy's aftermath. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, its micro-etched coordinates no longer secret evidence but public testament to truth's eventual victory over convenient fiction. Chaplain Delgado appeared to walk with her toward the parking area, their conversation touching on the spiritual dimensions of institutional healing. Alina would be amazed by what her courage has accomplished, the chaplain observed. Her voice memo sparked changes that will protect countless future sailors. I always said the Navy's greatest strength wasn't its technology or firepower. It was the willingness of individual sailors to do the right thing even when doing wrong would be easier. These protocols just make doing right a little more protected and doing wrong a little more difficult. The drive home took her past the harbor where evening watch rotations were beginning aboard ships throughout the fleet. Somewhere among those vessels, junior officers were filing safety assessments that would be preserved regardless of command preferences, and senior officers were learning that crew protection enhanced rather than hindered operational effectiveness. Maya's studio awaited her return, its familiar tools and workspace offering the same satisfaction they had before institutional betrayal had redirected her life toward public service. But now the space held additional meaning, proof that individual craft and institutional craft shared common foundations in precision, integrity, and commitment to excellence. She traced the coordinates on her wedding ring one final time before beginning work on a new commission, memorial jewelry for another military family whose loss had been complicated by institutional failure. The work would be guided by lessons learned from her own journey through grief toward accountability, creating beauty that honored memory while demanding truth. Outside her studio windows, San Diego settled into evening routines that included Navy families confident their institutions would tell them honestly how their loved ones lived, served, and when necessary, died. That confidence had been earned through the courage of individuals who chose difficult truth over comfortable lies. Honor, as Alina had always insisted, didn't need applause, but it did need guardians willing to pause anthems when truth demanded attention.